Well folks, I played and finished Doom Eternal. If you've been following my channel, you know I'm a big fan of Doom, and that my channel has become extremely Doom-centric over the last few months in preparation for Doom Eternal. In my video, Doom Eternal and the Christian, I talked about how I as a Christian would be approaching Doom Eternal based on the lore as it had been hinted at by gameplay reveals and previews up to that point. Of course, we all knew at that point that Doom is always about gameplay first and plot second. But lore has certainly been stepped up in Eternal, as well as my suspicion that it could be interpreted as cultural or religious commentary at one level or another, as tongue-in-cheek as the tone of the game can be. So basically, I want to divide this video into two parts. How I like it as a Doom fan, and how I like it as a Christian. This will likely be a very spoiler-heavy video, with the majority of spoilers coming in the second half, though I won't really try to avoid them in the first either. You've been warned. By the way, I'm taking the gameplay footage from my live streams of the game, so yeah, you get to look at my beautiful face for most of the video. So, does Doom Eternal live up to all the hype that id Software has been putting out there? For me, the short answer is yes. However, there are a couple of ways I'd like to expand on that. As I played the game, I realized that a lot of the quote-unquote hype, for example, that Hugo Martin put out there about how intense and insane the game would be, was not so much hype as it was preparation and instruction for the fans as to how to approach what was coming, so that they wouldn't be taken off guard. While reception seems mainly very positive, when I do see negative comments, they do seem to often come from people who had no idea these changes were announced well in advance. The game is absolutely much harder than Doom 2016. Ammo management is now a central aspect of the game, and for an unsuspecting player, the amount of ammo can seem as skimpy as heck if they haven't been told how important the chainsaw is. The platforming is definitely new and different. The puzzle solving can often take serious puzzling. The lore is definitely deeper. The third-person cutscenes, though short and skippable, are totally a thing. People who have followed the development closely seem to be taking these changes in stride, but for an unsuspecting player who wanted the mechanics to be just like Doom 2016, they can be a real kick in the head. I for one really respect the changes. The core feel of Doom 2016 is definitely there, but it'll probably be a while before someone finds mechanics in the game to exploit in order to make things easy, as many did in 2016. As far as my personal enjoyment of the game goes, I do wonder how much it comes from my personal taste in games. Some people complain about the platforming and say, "What is this, Mario?" Well, I love Mario 64 and Mario Odyssey, but that's not what Doom is about, they might say. Well, hold on. The original Doom 1 and 2 from the 90s had lots of hidden areas that needed to be discovered through things like strafe running and lifts. Who's to say the creators back then wouldn't have used jump mechanics to do something similar if their early engine had allowed it? I could be wrong. Some are frustrated with the level of puzzle solving in some areas of the game, but it definitely doesn't bother me since, for instance, I love adventure puzzle games. Back in the 90s when Doom and Myst were basically rival genres, I enjoyed them both. I guess people can just decide for themselves whether they think the two genres should go together to this extent. I would simply contend that maybe they already went together, more than many would like to admit. As far as people's complaints about the expansion and story elements go, I've always been fascinated by Doom lore, even when we got little scraps of text between levels in the 90s. Which now of course brings us to the combat. It has been said by the creators, and now by players, that this game is very much like a combat puzzle. Well, it's true. In order to master this game's combat, you absolutely must remain mentally engaged at all times. Like a chess match, you have to decide which enemies to prioritize and which to avoid, and when. You have to decide when to use the chainsaw to farm ammo, when to use the flame belch for shield, and when to glory kill for health, just to list a few things. You can never hold still and your brain can never turn off, not if you want to live for more than 5 seconds in combat. What was definitely most impressive about the combat was the level to which the game forces you to become better. I found myself saying repeatedly, That was the most intense fight ever, only to come to a harder one minutes later and conquer it based on the tools I'd gained. The most insane example of this is the fact that there are about 3 mini boss fights in the game, separate from the major boss fights. These fights feel insane when you first enter into them, and you feel like you've conquered a major challenge when they're completed. However, later in the game, these bosses become somewhat regular visitors in later battle arenas. If you've embraced the game's training along the way, which you must, you will find that you are absolutely capable of taking these enemies on with the skills you've acquired and resources that have been given to you. This kind of rapid progression and increased intensity is one of the main things that makes me like this game so much, even though it definitely caused me a lot of suffering to the very end of the game. But eventually, it led me to an experience I can never forget, specifically during the final boss fight. This fight, as well as the other craziest encounters in the game, seem to be designed to make you panic as violent images flash across your screen, trying to intimidate you. However, after several deaths, as I frantically ran around the arena of the final boss fight, gathering resources, I stopped allowing myself to get worked up. I noted the resources around me. I slipped into a calm rhythm. My heart rate slowed, and as I dealt the final blow to the final boss, I realized the kind of mastery this game was trying to bring me to. I've never had a game challenge me that hard and inspire me to rise and meet the challenge. On a side note, I wouldn't recommend playing the game as fast as I did. I decided to grind through it in about 3 days so that I could return to watching videos about it on YouTube and avoid spoilers. I also wanted to work on projects like this video. It took me about 20 hours to complete the game. For more skilled players who don't stop as often to read lore, it may be faster. The intense increase in difficulty over the course of the campaign may be more enjoyable during a slower playthrough. I played on PC, and the game is not without its bugs. I definitely can see some patches coming through before long. Most notably for me were the lost souls. As far as I could tell, they were completely broken. They maybe landed 3 successful hits on me throughout the course of the game. Otherwise, I would pretty much always find them spinning randomly or stuck in floors and walls, ready to be killed. Not exactly a bug that disadvantaged the player, though I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong though, this is no Fallout 76. Gameplay is solid. Last time we visited the topic of me playing the Doom franchise as a Christian, we were only speculating about where the lore and the plot might go in Doom Eternal, based on what had been revealed by creators so far. I recommend watching my video Doom Eternal and the Christian to know what questions I entered the game asking, since I don't want to revisit old material all over again. I'll do my best to summarize. While I don't think we should attempt to read creators' minds, and I think there's a real limit to how seriously we should take a video game, regardless of our beliefs, I do suspect that most creators, either consciously or unconsciously, allow their cultural, political, and even religious biases into their art form in one way or another. The original Doom games from the 90s were made largely by atheists, with a few exceptions, so the fact that they made a game where there was a literal hell and you fight against its forces clearly was not a reflection of their beliefs. Strangely enough, when looked at from a strictly theological perspective, it was not necessarily a game in conflict with Christian beliefs. It really had more to do with how the individual Christian felt about on-screen violence. I've covered that topic in other videos. In the new Doom games, however, the lore is much more in-depth and can be much more open to interpretation. I entered Doom Eternal aware of the concept of the Con Maker and the Maker race, and I wondered whether they would end up being some kind of stand-in for religious corruption and oppression, painting religious dogma as a destructive and exploitative force. However, I also saw the possibility they might be a representation of a departure from pure and uncorrupted religious ideals, and there might be a force above them that will force the original idea of righteousness as a consequence of their evil. The way the game progressed in answering these questions was fascinating. I think that an atheist could initially get a real kick out of the way the religion of the Makers is represented. They talk about believers and unbelievers like a fire and brimstone street preacher, easily interpreted as fodder to be used for scoffing at biblical Christianity. It could be viewed this way even further when the lore hints at the idea of the con makers influencing the religious beliefs of the worlds they visit, specifically with the idea of a death and resurrection. I would say that the story progression seems to call into question such a simple interpretation. However, I should point out that the game's representation of hell is consistently at odds with how a Christian would view it. Hell in Doom is explicitly described as a place made to feed off the suffering of the innocent. However, in Christianity, all humanity is fallen and is inclined towards sin, prone to choosing the path that leads to hell without Christ. Therefore, any suffering that hell has to offer is not arbitrary and capricious like it is in the Doom universe. Obviously, this topic could lead to endless discussion and is one of the barriers to belief for many who don't follow Christ like I do, but I will leave the topic there for now. Suffice to say, the creators are clearly painting a hell based off pop culture and Far Side cartoons, not one they intend to be taken seriously. As the game reveals more and more from the history of the makers, it becomes clear that they were descended from someone or something called the Father. It is described as uncertain whether the Maker race came from this Father splitting into all the beings of the Maker race, or whether their beliefs were somehow descended from his essence. It seems the lore is intentionally ambiguous here. In any case, there is mention of someone stealing the essence of the Father and doing something unknown to it. Perhaps I need to explore the lore more deeply, but it seems to hint at the idea of the Doomslayer now possessing the essence of the Father. Consider the kind of picture the game could be painting now. The corrupt and exploitative version of a belief system versus its pure, original form. I will admit, however, that if the creators are trying to put forward an allegory like this at all, they are doing it in a way that intentionally leaves it open to the player's interpretation. Hugo Martin seems to have said as much. Doom could be read as humanity embracing the best of its own ideas to survive and throwing off religion in its dogmatic form as a result. However, it could also be seen as the throwing off of false religion in favor of true religion. To me, that seemed to be a solid take on the ARC versus the UAC in Doom Eternal. However, since the Doomslayer is originally human, this could be taken as a humanist statement, just as well as it could be taken as a nod to the idea of a literal divine Christ figure. Again, I think this ambiguity is intentional. So, as a Christian, I totally enjoyed this game. I recommend that anyone who has a taste for first-person shooters and a tolerance for over-the-top violence take a crack at it. But as a Christian, I recommend you do so with a mind toward deeper issues, even if the game doesn't ask you to. I think that's a beneficial thing to do with all forms of entertainment. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel so that you know when new videos are uploaded or when I go live with game live streams, things like that. Again, tomorrow, I put out a short video earlier that tomorrow my Doom Eternal Collector's Edition is finally supposed to come. Best Buy shipped it out late, but we should be able to at least open it up as a trophy for beating the game. So, hope to see you there for that. And again, like, subscribe, share it, comment, all that good stuff if you liked it. So, we'll see you again in the next video. Talk to you later.